welcome to Bard's Craft. In the last episode, you might have seen my friend fiddling around with his Ossiarch Bonereaper miniatures. Well, we got inspired and decided to make ourselves some bone terrain. Here we have made patterns similar to those of the diorama base from this miniature. This is how it's done. First, we cut out suitable XPS foam pieces about 1.5 centimeters thick. Also, some smaller pieces that are half the thickness. When making terrain, always consider miniature placement. Here, Ingvar seems to be happy. In order to easily carve the patterns, we first made a few irregular shapes with some detail inside. Next, a few round shapes. Then the rest of the area was filled with curved lines that connect to each other in strange ways. They seem to weave over and under each other. Think of it like a basket. Alright, it's not identical, but that's not the point. It's simple and looks good. There, the patterns are now done. We made stairs by simply cutting away some foam. Jerry also made a few strange pieces. Next, we attached all stacking layers with the hot glue gun. Yep, super simple. Most of the leftover pieces will be used as ornaments later. The sides of these pieces will be stone, partially covered by bone plates. The bone plates are inspired by images I have seen of the, let's call it the official terrain. We made the simple stone textures first. There we go. The leftover pieces were also shaped and textured in the same way. Oats. The bone plate building material will be made from a sheet of cardstock and PVA glue. I smeared on glue textures as shown here, random wavy streaks. We made this larger stone formation while the glue dried. This piece will go on the top. Okay, the glue has dried. Now we cut out pieces of different size. To clarify, these will be bone plates that go over some parts of the stone surfaces. Also, we'll use these sheets later. We covered the non-stone textured areas with somewhat interlocking bone plates. Hot glue is a good option for this, as PVA glue seemed to be a bit tricky to work with. This is how the first piece turned out. The process is straightforward but requires a bit of patience. After an hour of extremely enjoyable gluing, we were done. Next we made the bases. Here we used the same material as I used for my battle mats, a floor protective mat used in renovations and indoor building. Cardstock and cardboard also works well, but it might bend at the next step, so be cautious. To cover the ground, we applied PVA glue on the bases and also on this bigger piece. Then we sprinkled on flocking. Here I used the pleasant smelling bark choppings. I really recommend using this as rubble and stone flocking if you can find anything in your local forest. Just don't break any laws by doing so. Break the bones of your enemies instead. Before any painting, we shall make the main piece of this terrain. First, I made simple stairs with a concave shape. Just a few cuts and a few steps, and I glued it on to a larger base. Then applied the patterns we made earlier. Meanwhile, my friend was experimenting with the stick and hot glue bone textures, comparing the results with the skeleton from the Dragon's Gorge diorama. Okay, the stairs are now done with the patterns carved and the bone plates glued on the sides. Before making the wall, we prepared bony support pillars from barbecue sticks by cutting them to roughly 8 cm bits and then sharpening them. Then we applied texture with the hot glue gun. Just apply the glue and shape it randomly. Nothing complicated. This should result in simple bone textures. There we go. In the same way, we made lots of 1.5 centimeter pieces and some 4 centimeter ones. That should be all we need for later. For the wall, we cut out a piece of cardboard to begin with. To make room for the opening, this part has to be a bit higher. In order to make a sloping wall, I used a test piece as reference to easily get the right measurements. I cut out the pieces and I should not have cut here. I fixed that and noticed the measurements were way off. I fixed that as well and glued the wall pieces into place. Lastly, I covered the ends with fitting bits. The inner sides were covered with cardstock. Learn more about simple cardboard buildings in the Dwarven Stronghold build. Then I applied the sand and rubble flocking. After that, it is time to add the bone plates on the wall. We made more of the bone texture and cardstock sheet and started gluing on pieces. The pieces don't have to fit perfectly, as long as it is simple and looks good, I am happy. After a while of working, this is what we ended up with. Next, we glued on the bone textured platforms for the battlements. Here, just pour on lots of hot glue and place on the platforms. At this point, we also placed on the bone textured barbecue sticks. Most importantly, the sticks stabilize the platform, but of course they also look good. Okay, we also glued on sticks along the edges of the cardboard. In this way, the platforms won't look too thin and miniatures will stay in place better. Next, the 1.5 centimeter long sticks were glued on top of the battlements. By the way, this fortification makes little to no sense. I just realized enemies can hide under the platforms. Well, perhaps it's a trap. Anyway, here I'm removing hot glue strings and cleaning up. In this build, you can fill up most gaps and errors with hot glue. Usually this is not advised, but here it works well with the other glue textures. As you can see, these poles stand loosely on the ground. That is a small problem, but like most other things in life, this can be fixed with a bit of glue and flocking. That is good. While at it, I also placed some of the textured sticks on the side of the door. The way I did this was a bit tricky. I poked in sticks and layered on flocking and more glue. This resulted in a mound with bone textured stakes sticking out. Pretty good, but I recommend just attaching the sticks with hot glue first, then apply flocking using PVA glue. You'll save some time for sure. Next, I split a plastic skull and glued in the face side, then cleaned up with some flocking. These are cheap and should be found easily, good for many crafting projects. It is now time for the base coat. I might add ornaments such as banners, weapons and shields later, in another video. The base coat I'm using is mixed from black, brown, water and PVA glue. This is just for the bark flocking. While this dries, you should watch out for any warping, especially if you use cardboard or cardstock for the bases. Next, I base painted the stone surface with black. Okay, I'll finish the stone and ground surfaces before painting anything else. The stone is overbrushed with brown first. Then I overbrushed the ground with grey. The ground is supposed to be dead and colorless, just black, grey to white. While at it, I gently dry brushed the stone surfaces with the same paint. Then I dry brushed the ground with a light grey, almost white. This time the bark bits stayed in place well. I used a more watery paint glue base coat. Perhaps that's the way to go. That's almost too much white. Well, imagine that there's a bunch of calcium laying around. Moving on. I dry brushed the stone surfaces with a tan mixed from brown and white. that is done. I then painted all of the bone plate surfaces with white. This can take some time, and I recommend using good quality paints for this. On a test piece, the wash seemed to crack the paint when I was using shitty paints. Perhaps this would be easier with an airbrush. I might get one at some point. It's a bit messy, but that's okay. Next I painted the hot glue textured bone sticks with a tan. Hot glue is not the best painting surface, so paint properly. This is a tricky spot, but luckily there is a door. Next, let's go for the pattern card surfaces. I painted with a light brown mixture. By the way, if you're enjoying the craft, do subscribe and like this video in the end. Okay, now prepare for the most satisfying step. I'll use the dark wash to cover the bone and patterned surfaces. Oh yeah, that's what I've been waiting for. I'm impressed. Thank you, Army Painter. Then the rest. Here, a quick, savage painting tip. Pour it directly on your terrain. Here we can see the cardstock messy glue bone textures, trademarked by Bard's Craft. It seems to work really well. Be brave with the wash. Make sure to get plenty of it in all crevices and gaps. Okay, this looks a bit too uniform for my taste. I dry brushed the bone plates with white. Then, something still felt a bit missing, so I decided to add grass flocking just on some areas. You will pay Nagash's tithe, or your bones will serve us forevermore. The bone textures really work. Nice. The techniques can be used for scatter terrain, bases for miniatures, or why not make an entire castle or siege engines. Pay your tribute to Bard's Craft. Do that by subscribing, and I'll show you how to craft more terrain and minis. All we ask is cheap terrain. These companies had their chance. They chose their fate. Will you pay, or will you serve?